So with that, I am going to introduce now Danielle, Courtney, and Anna. They're going to talk with you about brushing the surface of biosecurity, our science session, our STEM session for the day.
All right, so good morning, everyone. While Danielle assists us with getting our presentation loaded, we just want to make sure everyone can hear us properly. Anna and I are in the same space, so we are practicing proper public safety by wearing our mask. But I can guarantee you that we're very excited, even though you can't tell. Hopefully you can tell through our eyes that we're super excited to be here today to talk to you about biosecurity. You may think to yourself, how can this topic relate to me? For those of you in particular that maybe have a background in biosecurity, you think of it directly as it correlates with animals. But I can guarantee you that if nothing else, this session will leave you wanting to wash your hands. And that's our goal today, to just help you brush the surface with biosecurity, to take back these skills and concepts to your club, to your communities, your country, and guess what? Your world. So we're excited today, and we guarantee you that there's something for everyone in this lesson. So buckle up and let's have fun.
Can you see the PowerPoint?
Not yet.
What do you see?
We see the first page. We see the screen Steve shared. While she works on that, we can actually kind of go ahead and get started. Malia says she has the right screen. Maybe. Pulaski doesn't. Okay, so while we work on that, no worries. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So the first thing that I'd like you to do is just help us to define the word biosecurity. So if you would, let's utilize our chat box below and type in what you think of when you think of the word biosecurity. It doesn't have to be a large definition. It could just be some words, some thoughts, some concepts. And while we do that, I am going to actually just run through our overview of what we'll be covering today. So we're going to define biosecurity. We're going to do an activity called the CHIP activity. We're going to define zoonotic diseases. We're going to grow some bacteria. And then we're going to make a plan by mapping it out. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so let's see, what do we have here in the chat box? Lots of things. So if I don't read yours, don't feel offended. I'm reading them as they're in real life. Life safety, health safety practices that protect humans and animals, conscientiously protecting livestock, horticulture products from infection and cross-contamination. Excellent job, Joellen. That's a very dynamic definition there. So some things that I think of when I first heard the word biosecurity are the X-Files. Okay, we think of people in these hazmat suits with these respirators on, going in and identifying these foreign subjects. That's probably a little bit extreme, but honestly, that's where my mind went as a youth when I was learning about biosecurity. So all of these are excellent. Some other things you might think of are the words like, Danielle, you can advance to the next slide if you would. The word, words like clean, sterile, safe, hazardous material, showering in, showering out, protective clothing, dangerous, pathogens, hand washing. All of those things are words that we might commonly think of when we hear the word biosecurity. I'm here to tell you that there is no such thing when we're talking about a barn or a fair environment or a petting zoo or any type of interaction where you have humans and animals engaging. A sterile environment is nearly impossible. Even at a veterinary clinic, they have to work super hard to make sure that what they're doing is sanitizing, and probably there's still room for error, even in our hospital settings, as we all know. So defining biosecurity, a more formal definition, refers to the measures that assist in preventing the introduction and or spread of harmful organisms like viruses, as we know all too well, bacteria, etc., to animals and plants in order to minimize the risk of transmission of infectious diseases. By practicing good biosecurity, whether you have animals or not, you can help reduce the risk of diseases being carried from your property by people, animals, equipment, vehicles, either accidentally or on purpose. You'll help protect flocks, herds, human health by preventing the spread of diseases. So now we're going to break it up. We're going to start breaking down biosecurity, and Anna's going to lead us in an activity.
Okay, so the activity we're going to do today is called a Biosecurity Chip, and it's the basics of biosecurity. So if you're an in-person attendee, there are some directions at the site that they're going to pass out some materials for you. You can get into small groups of 3 to 4 if you would like to. If you're not comfortable with that, you can try to share the bags at home. So if you're able to, if you can find, and we'll give you a few minutes to find some of these items, we would like you to find a bag of some sort. It could look a little bit like a brown paper bag. It could be a tote bag, whatever type of bag you want. If you can get about like a cup of dried pasta, like a macaroni or something that has that similar shape. I think we use some penne pasta. So if you can get like a cup of that, and then a cup of like a dried beans or a rice, or maybe you have some like arts and crafts supplies laying around, some beads, something in that size though would be great. And then if you have some sprinkles, I know a lot of us are doing some Christmas baking coming up. If you have some sprinkles in there, grab some of those, or maybe some pepper if you have that laying around, because we're going to need all of that for our activity. So we're going to give you just a couple minutes for those at home. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and grabbing a bag, a cup of either dried pasta or something in that similar shape, a cup of dried beans and rice, and some sprinkles, or maybe you have some leftover Halloween candy that you can still put in there. And go ahead and put those 1 cup of pasta, 1 cup of beans or rice, or 2 shakes of those sprinkles and herbs inside your bag, okay? So we'll give you just a couple minutes to do that, and we'll let the Insight attendees get their bags from those hosting. Okay, ready in the, if you're ready, you can give us a thumbs up or a tap in the chat box ready, so that we know that everybody has the supplies they need and we can move forward. Okay, it looks like most of us have the supplies we need. So what you're going to do, so you're going to go ahead, some of you might have already done this, and those collecting at home already know, but you're going to open the bag and you're going to look and see what's inside of it. So we kind of already kind of give you a little preview with the previous slide of what's in there. So you should have some macaroni, some beans, some sprinkles or pepper, nerd candy. So what's in the bag? What does this even represent? Why are we doing this, right? So the bag represents our environment. So those are any areas that you come into contact with that could carry or spread germs or diseases. The pasta represents people. The beans represent your animals, and the sprinkles are those pathogens, those disease-causing bacteria and viruses. So go ahead and close up that bag. And you're gonna go ahead and give it a good shake. Like you're shaking bacon, right? Give it a good shake. Okay, so we're gonna open it up. So what do you see? Is there anything different in the bag that you can kind of see? Is it all look the same? If you want to do some responses in the chat box, what do you see when you reopen it? Okay, so somebody said the sprinkles at the bottom, pasta's on top. Okay, smaller things have gone to the bottom. A lot of people are saying the sprinkles are at the bottom.
They're all mixed.
They're mixed together. Yep. Pasta on top and middle. Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of responses where a lot of things are just they're mixed together, right? And so that represents our real life where we're all mixed together, okay? And so can you still see the sprinkles? Some of you said yes. If you just glance at it, like in mine, I can't see the sprinkles on the you can't see that, but I can't see the sprinkles on the bottom of mine. So some say no, some say yes. So can't see them, couldn't see them when we started. Okay, so there we go. So even if you can't see the sprinkles, which our sprinkles represent our pathogens, right? So even if you can't see them, were they still there? Yeah, they were still there. So just like that, we know that sometimes that we can't see all of the pathogens that are out there in the real world. We know that they're still there. So why is it important to know that?
You can type in the chat box.
So yeah, so pathogens, they're so small that we can't see them without a microscope sometimes, right? So even though we can't see those pathogens, they still have the potential to make both animals and humans ill, right? And to stay vigilant against them. Disease progression, we can assume we are in contact with pathogens and we should be safe, right? So some basic kind of hygiene that we need to know. That's why we do certain things. So at this time, Courtney is going to take us through what CHIP means.
All right, so hopefully by now we can sort of answer the question, why are we concerned about biosecurity? And I think today's concept is that we all have a much better understanding than we probably did a year ago. We've all had to take strides and steps to take things in our own lives more seriously and be more preventative. So as I said earlier, biosecurity is a set of steps that we take to prevent animals from being infected with spreading pathogens. Biosecurity is a vital step in ensuring that our food supply is safe. So now we're going to learn about what the biosecurity measures are. We can use that. And by doing that, we're going to use the acronym CHIP. So if you'll look to the screen, you can see that we have it kind of outlined as to what that means. But as we talk about CHIP, I want you to think about each of these steps. So C is for cleanliness. H is for history. I is for isolation. P is for proper management. So let's break it down a little bit. I want you to look at the C. What types of things in your own lives, whether you have animals or not, or maybe you're involved in a fair or a petting zoo or some type of event where you may have human and animal interaction, what types of things could that C represent by defining it with the word cleanliness? So if you would just take some time in the chat box to type in what you think the C could stand for as it relates to animals and humans being interactive. There are no such thing. So cross-contamination, okay. What else? Sanitation, all right. See a lot of that. Wipes, yep. A everyday staple. Washing our hands, absolutely. Manure management. Cleaning cages, yep. Mask, yeah. All right, so some other things we can think about for that C when we're talking about cleanliness is it starts by keeping your animals and the equipment you use or the equipment that's used for those animals around them clean. So when we talk about that, we oftentimes think of our own 4-H environments where we may have youth sharing supplies and equipment or even sitting down to have lunch on the show box. That's not always necessarily the best idea. human health is a big deal, as we know. So this starts with personal hygiene as a part of that. We want to prevent diseases as well as viruses. So things like, just as we're going to keep mentioning, washing your hands, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Let's go into H. So again, how do we relate this to those commonalities that we can think of between our animal and human interaction? What do we think the H in history could represent in these types of environment? So just take some time to put your ideas in the chat box for the history as it relates to human and animal interaction. This one's a little more challenging, but when you hear the answer, I promise you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Medical history, animal herd health. Yep, we're starting to get it. Pre-existing conditions. Where has we been? So if we think of today, we're in this environment, this great time to study biosecurity, if you want to call it that, but we are studying how humans are moving. So we're talking about contact tracing, and that's sort of what the history is. But anytime you bring a new animal into your environment, you want to know where it's been, how it's been housed, and who it's been around. And even when we're bringing our animals into our events, even something as simple as a single ag day, you want to make sure that the animals coming in are healthy, because more than likely there's going to be multiple sources of animals. So you want to make sure that you can secure that environment for those people that are bringing those animals to keep everyone healthy. And again, obviously you don't want to have sick animals at an event and intermingling with humans either. All right, so then we move on to I for isolation. What types of things might we consider in isolation as we refer to human and animal interaction? Quarantine. It's $1 million word. So yeah, I mean, quarantine, isolating after travel. Again, we are experts in this as we can relate to this in our everyday lives. And actually the proper recommendation for animals is to quarantine them for 7 to 14 days after you bring them home from a fair. So if you show a chicken at the Marion County Fair, and then you decide you bring in that chicken home, it's a good idea to have a separate space for that animal to go to quarantine if you can. Similar to what we're facing today, where if you travel outside of the state, it's recommended that you quarantine for that 14 days or 10 days or whatever the CDC recommendation is at the time. But again, isolation is something that we can definitely relate to today. And then finally, the P for proper management. So I'll kind of give you a hint at this one. It's just sort of putting all those practices in at play. It makes for a nice word chip. We could probably add some letters to this, but then it wouldn't be the word chip. So yeah, as some of you are saying, complete record keeping, just practicing management practices that include observing animals and yourself for sickness, conducting proper appropriate vaccinations at the time, and then providing optimum animal health protocol as well as animal health nutrition practices. So that is the CHIP motto. And now we will move along into zoonotic diseases. So several years ago, we kind of flipped the script on zoonotic diseases. In our own state, they were really brought to the forefront that created some changes in practices and how we do things. And by that, I'm talking about we'll call it for layman's terms, the swine flu. Obviously, there are different strands of flu that can be variant between humans and animals and vice versa. So we're just using that as an example. I'm not defining it as the swine flu, but that's what we're going to call it for simplifying today. So zoonotic diseases are infectious diseases that can be transmitted between animals and people. So actually, it would be a perfect day to study biosecurity just right outside my window today. So there's a large cattle show happening. And generally at the first cattle show of the year, almost all the animals and humans get sick with some sort of virus. We hope that doesn't happen. But one of the most common viruses or bacteria that we see, fungi, is ringworm. So if there are cattle out there with ringworm, chances are they're going to spread it to another animal. I actually had a friend growing up who, I always share this story because it makes you think twice. I remember sitting at the Hoosier Beef Congress, watching him take a Scotch comb and comb his head. That Scotch comb had been in a calf with ringworm. And then a couple weeks later, his parents couldn't figure out what was on his head. And they thought that his dog had maybe given him something on his head. No, it was ringworm. And it came from combing your hair with a Scotch comb at the Hoosier Beef Congress. And I remember it. And so from this day forward, I'm very cautious if I'm around. Yeah, probably make your head itch. If I'm around ringworm at all, I try not to touch any part of my arms or my head because it can happen. So we're going to talk about how more than 60% of infectious diseases that we know of are zoonotic. In fact, 75% of new and emerging diseases are zoonotic. And this information comes from the CDC. And actually, tens of thousands of Americans get sick from a zoonotic disease. They may go to a fair or an event as such and not even realize it. They may just go home feeling a little sick and think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have eaten that corn dog. But chances are they could have actually experienced some sort of virus while they were there. So again, these are generally caused by bacteria, so things like salmonella or oral transmission from an infected animal. We talk about kissing the pig. That's probably not always a good idea. We talk about even just handling food as we, are cleaning up after our animals, or we go to pet something and then we go eat lunch. That's why we strongly discourage eating food inside of a barn or even preparing food inside of a barn. Viruses, we think of things like rabies. It's why all of our 4-H animals, cats, dogs, and horses, when you're handling them, we want to make sure that we're safeguarding those people that are handling them. So that's why we do require those species, in fact, to be rabies prevented, because we don't always know when those critters that could potentially give those animals rabies, when they might be around. I saw an image one time that stuck in my head where a lady went into her horse barn and she had a bucket of feed and had no idea there was a bat in the bottom of the bucket. Absolutely, vaccinations. And she put the horse went down to eat out of it. Horse's head came back and the bat was attached to its nose. So we can't always prevent things. So what we can do is have those vaccinations in place to ensure that our humans and animals are safe in those environments. Influenza, again, we talked about that. Parasites, so roundworms. There's lots of times where animals, one of the best things you can do to ensure your animals don't have worms is go to the local farm store and figure out how you can, what you can buy to purchase and give it to them right before they go to the county fair, of course, following the proper withdrawal label. But that's something we think about, but it's not often think about, but we always want to make sure, whether it's a cat or dog or pig or whatever, that we are treating them for worms. And then we talked about ringworm as our example of fungus as well. So if your pet has an itchy area or has hair loss, it could be ringworm. It might be an allergy, but it's something to take notice in. All right. So primary routes of zoonotic diseases. So we have direct contact. So petting, touching animals, getting bit or having scratches. Aerosol, so transmission of viruses or bacteria through the air. That's oftentimes something that we forget about, but as we know today, that's something that we definitely consider. That's why we have protocols in place for proper social distancing, etc. Foodborne illnesses or foodborne modes that can cause something to be consumption of something unsafe. Fomite, this might be a new word and one that's not as easy to understand, but that is basically contact with an inanimate object. So oftentimes I think of the word fomite, I think of the word furniture or stuff that an animal may have touched. So a lot of times if we're working with kids, it could be any equipment that they're using, but it could also be that bag chair that you keep in your cattle area or your dog area at the fair that you don't ever pay attention to. You just throw it in the car when it's time to go. So all those things need to be taken into consideration when we're talking about controlling biosecurity. And then last but certainly not least, those darn pesky mosquitoes, flies, fleas, ticks, we call those vector-borne. And we obviously know there are some pretty serious things that can go along with them, like West Nile and Lyme disease, just to name a few. So what can we do to minimize the risk? Well, again, we are becoming experts at this every day, unfortunately, but also we can definitely learn from the situation. Again, this is an activity that you can take back and really apply it today. Just asking your youth, or if you are a youth yourself, leading through activities to ask them, what measures can we take to help make sure that we're being biosecure? But right now, today, anyone that falls into these categories can help or can be of concern. So children under the age of 5, because we know they like to stick their hands in their mouths, adults older than 65, people with weakened immune systems, and then pregnant women follow into that category of risk. So oftentimes we do produce signage that, along with the State Board of Health, that says a word of caution to those that may fall into these categories before entering our barns. But more importantly, our facilities. The biggest thing we can do is provide signage and help remind them that there are designated areas to eat. There are designated areas to wash your hands. And if you do go into a barn, make sure you're taking those measures. So wash your hands, prevent bites. And by that, I mean like mosquito spray, different things you can do that way during the summer months, especially. Learn safe food handling. Purdue Extension has a great program that they put on called Serve Safe. I always say it backwards, but we have lots of local experts that can help make sure you're doing the right thing. So reach for those. Beware at fairs, petting zoos, etc. when you're handling animals. And then ultimately try to avoid bites and scratches if you are handling animals. I remember when I was young, I'd never held a hamster in my life, and someone was like, "You want to hold my hamster at the fair?" And the first thing that little guy did was bite my finger. So I've had a kind of a grudge against hamsters ever since, but he bit my finger because I smelled like probably some other animal that I had touched. But again, washing our hands is the number one thing you can do. We could probably play a game right now of locate all the CDC signs wherever you are, because it's a plentiful of reminders to wash our hands. But we say it so many times, washing them for 20 seconds, singing happy birthday or your favorite tune that you may have fine-tuned by now. That's the best thing you can do, of course, with warm soap and antibacterial soap and warm water.
So we wanted to have a little bit of, I'm going to call it fun, and we did a growing bacteria experiment. And so this experiment, this lesson plan does take some prep work, and it takes a few days to see results. So this is not like something that you could just do immediately, but it's something for you to plan out. But it has wonderful visual examples of bacteria growing. And so we're going to show you some of those, but this, we just wanted to kind of go a little brief synopsis of the lesson plan. And really the purpose is to get you to visualize and see the bacteria growing, because sometimes I'm a visual person. I like to see that. And obviously in the bag activity, the sprinkles were our visual example as well. So I like to see what those pathogens might be lurking about. And so in this experiment, we actually bought pre-prepared Petri dishes. And so we got them on Amazon, but there's other science companies that you can purchase them through, science education companies. And so they're pre-prepared. You don't have to really, you can do that if you want to prepare them yourself. But if we're going for youth, it's best to get the pre-prepared Petri dishes. So we're going to display the amount of bacteria present. And you could do it with your hand washing. You could do one example where you have unclean or unwashed hands. Then you could use one example of one that as a hand sanitizer. And then you can properly wash your hands, like Courtney mentioned, and do an example of that. So that would be a great visual example for anybody. And then, so some of those basic steps are listed on the right-hand side, but we do have a lesson plan that we can share. We can put it on our website as well. So you're pretty much going to collect those samples on those Petri dishes, and then you have to wait probably a day before you see anything come up. And then it gets better or worse, as you can say, as you wait even longer. So maybe up to, we have some examples up to, I think it's 76 hours, 78 hours that you'll be able to see. But it's good to have the youth record their observations and reflect on the results as they're going along, so they can kind of see day by day. We chose to take pictures so that you can see those visual examples yourself. So if we want to go on to the next slide, we'll see some examples. Okay. So, so Courtney over here has a corgi herd at home. And so she has some really good subjects that were willing to take a little swab of inside one of their mouths. And so if you can kind of see so we took 5 examples at home. One was your remote control. One was a toilet seat handle. Another one was a cell phone. Again, like I just said, one was inside of a corgi's mouth. And the 5th one was on one of their gates out in the barn where they have some cattle. And so as you can see, at 0 hours, you don't see a whole lot of going on, which hopefully you wouldn't at that time. But then 24 hours, you start seeing a few speckles here and there. You might have to zoom in on some of those pictures to be able to see them at that stage. If you want to go to the next slide, there we see some real growth coming on here at the 72 hours. So if we can look and make some observations, I will preface the toilet seat handle was cleaned and sanitized before they took a sample. So as you can see, that has a couple bacteria growths, but not too bad for a toilet seat handle. I mean, if you're going to take a sample in the bathroom, I don't think that's a too bad example right there. But then you have the corgi mouth, and that's in the top left-hand corner. I don't know, but I have a dog at home, and I love on my dog a lot. I might stop doing that more now when I see that example. And I knew that going in, but man, woo, I did not realize how much bacteria was growing inside of the dog's mouth. And then in the middle picture there, I believe that's the cell phone. And then the bottom right hand is the remote. And then the bottom left hand is the cattle gate. And then you look at 96 hours. So again, you can just see more and more of that growth. You can see that pattern evolving there about how much each item has of bacteria on it. So if you want to put it in the chat box, what are some of your observations that you saw in these pictures? What do you think?
Anna, one question that was asked was, are there good germs and bad germs?
Yeah, there are.
Think about where we get our penicillin from. As an example, penicillin, some people are highly allergic to it, but some people aren't. So that's something that can help us throughout. So yeah, there's definitely good germs and bad germs. And there is something to be said about building up your immunity, your immune system as well. So.
And maybe if you have some high schooler or somebody that wants to take this lesson plan a step further, you could probably collect some of these cultures that have grown and look at it under a microscope and see if you can identify any of those types of bacteria or common bacteria that we find. We chose not to do that, but it's really based on the skill level of the youth that you have and their interests. They can do that. So Danielle, if you want to go on to the next slide, I think we have some reflection questions that I'm asking here. So what differences that you want to put in the chat boxes did you observe in those Petri dishes?
They were a little hard to see, we agree.
Yeah.
Yep. There's more bacteria out there than we realized. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's just a great visual. One thing to note on the gate one that you couldn't really tell, but there was something fuzzy growing on that one that I would love to see under a microscope. That one came from outside. So I would be interested to learn. Yeah, exactly. The gate was exposed to other elements that, cows are licking the chain, hands that grab it that probably aren't washed, whatever's on your gloves when you do have gloves on. Yeah, there's lots of different things that could have been brought in from the outside.
And it's important to notice, we did not do a true lab sample. No. We weren't in a sterile environment. So there could have been some things that were airborne that collected on those plates too. But it's a simple activity to do with some youth to kind of get them thinking about that and thinking about the surfaces they touch and why it is so important for us to be clean and sanitized and wash our hands. I'd be really interested to see the hand washing one of those people that would like to do that, because that's a really good example, and it really helps you kind of hone in on the fact of why it's so important that we wash our hands in the proper ways that we do it. And then if you want to go on to the next slide, we have as we're talking about keeping your hands clean, CDC, of course, has a great website that you go to that kind of gives you some more instructions and details about hand washing and the effects on that. So again, we want to make sure that we're developing a biosecurity plan for our animals and livestock or event and for you. And so we can see that just on those Petri dishes, that example tells us why we need to do it. We know we can talk about it, we can say it, but when you see those good examples in person and visual, and just like Courtney's example of the ringworm, when you see it, it kind of hits home a little bit more. So it's important to develop your biosecurity plan for your home and for your own safety. So, some of those could include proper sanitation, accurate record keeping, requiring visitors to wear disposable footwear that you provide, washing clothing after you wear. These are things we've already kind of went over. But I would like to see everybody kind of develop their own plan and have that so that you can follow it and refer back to it.
Okay, and now thanks to the fine work of Danielle Sands, one of our 4-H STEM specialists focusing on engineering and technology, she helped us develop a map that she's going to lead us through to kind of put all of these concepts at play, but really relate it to you and something you can take back to your counties and review. So we'd like to thank Porter County for their lovely map. But as Danielle brings up the map and leads us through the activity, these are the points of emphasis that we're trying to really bring home. So on the map, you're going to see a bank of people, a bank of little animals, and a bank of hand washing stations. So as we look at the map, I want you to think about where you could drop these people, which I forgot. We should, Danielle, you're gonna be like, oh shoot, I forgot to have us scan the QR code. Sorry, that would have been helpful.
And if you're in person, they might have already brought it up on their screen. But
I also put the link in the chat.
Okay, perfect. She's on it.
Okay.
All right, so if you look at that link, and again, this is something we'll do now for time's sake, but also in the future, you can take this back. We'll make it available and use it at your own leisure. But this is Porter County Fairgrounds. And so what we want you to do is you can drop and drag the people, the animals, and then the little blue things there are hand washing stations into the areas where the animals and people probably will interact or engage, and then just different spots throughout the facility where you could put hand sanitizing stations, or maybe you have freestanding, the wash bin stations, just all those spots. And again, as you think of any type of event, you could make this an activity that you do. The goal is just to get us thinking about areas that we maybe don't always cover. So Danielle, is there anything else we need to know about the map that you would recommend when they use it?
No, just have fun playing around, moving the objects. And then also the reset button will easily bring everything back to normal so you can start all over again.
Yeah. So if any of you are on like a 4-H council or a fair board, or even if you're the youth representative, this would be a great activity to kind of bring out your county fair map if you have one. If you don't, maybe that's another activity. And you could help identify and locate those areas in which you feel there maybe needs to be signage, or maybe needs to be sanitation stations as well. So we again thank Danielle so much for doing this, because it's a wonderful tool. And it's a lot more fun than us just pulling up a map saying, where do you go? So.
And my screen's pretty small, so it's hard to see if I'm putting things in the right spots, but hopefully you can.
You can do it I'm sure some of you are doing it on your phones, but that is important to note too. So yeah, just any area, one area in particular, Anna always brings this up, we forget about. I may go in the barn, and I had to have permission as a kid to go on the midway, which was very rare. So I always forget about that. But most of the time, our spectators are going to walk through our barns. They're going to walk to the midway. They're going to grab a corn dog and then hop on the Ferris wheel. So all of those points of contact, I think definitely having some maybe you have restrooms out there, maybe you don't, but having several spots where you could properly sanitize out at the midway would be a good idea too. So that really is the lesson that we have today for you. So we hope that, again, if nothing else, we make you want to go wash your hands before you eat lunch. But more importantly, we hope that you can take back some of these tools and concepts to your own counties and communities. And we just want to encourage you all to do your part as you think about biosecurity and to stay safe out there. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. We thank you so much for joining us today.
Good job. Good job.
And mute. Okay, thank you so much, Danielle and Courtney and Anna. Really appreciate you sharing that information with brushing the surface of biosecurity. Certainly a very important topic also that we're all learning more about, as you mentioned. And yeah, I need to be careful around those dogs, don't I? So that's a good thing.